My name is Megan Owens. I am the Director of Compensation and Titling here at UW-Madison, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our forum today on becoming non-exempt, how changes to the Fair Labor Standards Act will affect you. Just on the outset, this particular forum, we're going to concentrate a little bit more on our program assistant and project assistant positions. We will also have here shortly Julie Carpolinia, who's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources at the Graduate School, here as well. So she'll be available to us at the end of the presentation to help us answer questions. So really glad that we'll have that extra resource available to us. We will certainly be able to answer any other questions as well. So if you aren't a program assistant or a project assistant, we will be happy to answer those questions. I also see that we have a number of our human resources representatives from the divisions in the audience, and that's really exciting to see because obviously these individuals are here to help support you so that when you have questions about your particular situation, they are hearing the same information that you're hearing. That's also exciting as well, and they can also hear the questions that you're asking. So, couple of housekeeping items I just wanted to talk about. First of all, you are going to be hearing from a number of different areas within the Office of Human Resources. We have 5 different speakers today. So with that, we also feel that some of your questions that you might come up with as a result of my speaking, for example, would probably be answered later in the presentation. So if you wouldn't mind, we would ask that you hold off to your questions at the end. We have had a lot of time for Q&A at the end, so please don't think that we won't have time for your questions. We certainly will. Presentations generally taking about an hour or so, and then we have the room for 2 hours, and we plan on being here for 2 hours. So we have plenty of time at the end for questions. Also, we are videotaping this session, so if you have people that are not available to make it today, that's fine. Let them know. We hope to have videos posted for all of our sessions by the end of this week. And that would be on our website, hr.wisc.edu/FLSA. But again, we'll get information when those websites are posted, the videos are posted. We will get that information out to all of you as well. My guess is I'm hoping all of you received an email from me and myself and Allison either today and also again on Thursday regarding the interest-free student loan options. So that will be the email address that we will use to send out communication regarding the video posting. If you did not get an email, please come and see me or Allison after the presentation because we want to make sure that we have got you on our list. Okay, so with that, those are my housekeeping items. All right. So after this session, we are hoping you will be able to identify what's changed with the Fair Labor Standards Act and what this change means to you. How does this affect your employment? And then, as a result, what actions might you need to take? We then, after that, we get through all these presentations, we'll be able to answer some of your questions. So, our agenda, what is changing? The overview, the change of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and again, we're going to go through payroll impacts, benefit impacts, paid leave impacts, and then scheduling and hours of work impacts. Some you'll see some impacts, some you'll see no impact at all. Some of it will mean nothing, but we want to make sure that you understand what is being impacted and what is not. So, with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Allison.
Hi. I'm Allison Niles, and I am the payroll manager in OHR, and I just want to start with what I think is the most important thing about my employment, which really is how and when I'm paid, right? So I just want to tell you, if you could go to the next slide, thanks, that becoming non-exempt changes how you report time, but it doesn't change your employee classification, your employee category. It doesn't change how you earn vacation or sick leave if you earn those. And it doesn't change your tuition remission. Next slide. It does change how often you get a paycheck, right? That's going to be a big part of what we talk about today. But it doesn't change how your paycheck is funded. It doesn't change your pay rate. Your pay rate is converted from an annual salary to an hourly rate. Your appointment percentage stays the same. and your benefit eligibility would stay the same. So those are sort of critical things that aren't changing, and we'll talk in depth about what is changing and what's not and why. But I just wanted to start with that because we know that this can be really stressful, and we hope that this helps get you started with a little bit less concern about what we're going to talk about today.
Oopsie.
Oh, thank you. It also changes your overtime eligibility, but it doesn't change GAP policy, so the grad school policy. It doesn't change your job duties, and it doesn't change your supervisor.
Okay. All right. So I'm back again. So I'm just going to go over a brief overview of the FLSA and what is changing. And then as a result, hopefully you can see why you're here today. So the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act was established in 1938. And is part of the Department of Labor's wage and hour laws. The law encompasses protections such as minimum wage, child labor, the amount of a work week, overtime, and youth employment. Everyone is covered, quote unquote, under the law. So if you're an employee, if you're considered an employee, you are covered under the law, and you are either exempt or non-exempt. Okay? So definitions of exempt and non-exempt. An exempt employee is one that is paid on a salary basis and are not subject to the overtime provisions under the FLSA. So it doesn't matter how many hours you work, you would never receive overtime or additional compensation for any additional hours you might work. For a non-exempt employee is subject to the protections outlined in the Fair Labor Standards Act and ensures one receives overtime pay as well as any pay for every hour worked. Okay? So you are paid for every hour that you work. Exempt employees are paid a salary. Non-exempt employees are paid hourly. Exempt employees normally don't receive additional compensation for more than 40 hours in a work week. Non-exempt employees are required to receive overtime pay for all hours over 40 in a work week. And that's at premium time generally, or time and a half. So, FLSA. So what determines whether you are exempt or non-exempt? There are 3 tests that you must meet, your position, I should say, must meet, in order for you to be considered exempt. One is a salary basis test, meaning that your salary you must be paid a salaried amount instead of an hourly amount. So the way that you are compensated is done as an overall basis. The minimum salary test, you must meet the minimum salary test, which is currently $455 a week or $23,660 annually. This is what is changing on January 1. The final test is the duties and discretion test, which means you must qualify as an executive, administrative, professional, or computer professional. And professional, just so we're clear, is defined by the Department of Labor. Okay? So there are guidelines that say specifically what constitutes an administrative professional, a professional, learned professional, such as many of you in this room would be considered a computer professional, etc. So you must meet those 3 tests in order to be exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. I will say, regardless of salary, though, teachers, doctors, and lawyers are always exempt. Do never ever have to meet a salary threshold. So, if you are considered, for most, like many of us on campus, some of us are considered teachers on campus. If you are a teacher, it means that the primary purpose for your work is to instruct. Now, I know we all work with students. Some of us advise. Those advising roles would not be considered teacher roles under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay. So, what's changed? So this is what's changing as of January 1. On September 24th, 2019, not that long ago, the Department of Labor issued a new rule that raised the minimum salary threshold from that $23,660 to $35,568, or $684 a week. For RC basis employees, that salary becomes $29,101. So, with order for someone to now be exempt, you must meet that threshold, that salary threshold, which is at $35,568. If you do not meet that $35,568, we are required to make you a non-exempt employee. Now, I know some individuals in the office might be like, well, look, my base salary is what's the P? 44,854, which is our current PA minimum. Why? It's more than 35,568. Why am I being made non-exempt? Because you are less than a half-time employee, a full-time employee, and FLSA does not allow us to not prorate. So they're looking at what you are actually bringing home, not what your base salary is. So if we round that up, let's just say it's 44, I'm making math easy for me. So let's just say you're a $44,000 an hour annually, a $44,000 a year annual rate, and you are a 50% time appointment. Your actual take home is $22,000, which therefore puts you under the threshold, and we can no longer consider you an exempt employee unless you meet a teacher, doctor, lawyer exemption. Okay. So, when does this take effect? January 1 of 2020. We recognize this date is not ideal. And actually, we, along with other institutions of higher ed, went and said, hey, what kind of grace period can we get? Because January 1 is an awful date for a lot of reasons. And there is no grace period. We were not allowed to get a grace period from the federal government. We tried, trust me, we tried. And that was not allowable nor possible. So we are, unfortunately, this is our date. Like I said, we're doing a whole bunch of, because we hear from 5 different people here today, and we'll talk a little bit about what that impacts is in terms of pay and all that fun stuff. So we will get there. But we do, please just recognize, we get January 1 is awful. We would have picked a different date ourselves if we had to do this. So who is effective? As I said, if the earnings are below the new minimum salary, then your employment status must be non-exempt. This is not just graduate students, but it's everybody. This affects every single employee on campus. We had to evaluate all employees to make sure that they met this threshold. Okay. So yes, some university staff and non-instructional academic staff are also going to be switched. I also recognize that we've recognized that there is some confusion because there are so many different types, and I know this slide is wordy and I apologize, but I wanted to make sure we got it all in there. And again, these slides will be posted so you can take a look at them hopefully before the end of the week. There are a number of different types of graduate student appointments out there, and for reasons I cannot tell you, the Department of Labor considers some of these appointments to be considered employees and some of them not. Generally, it revolves around why the individual is here. So if the Department of Labor considers an appointment to be for the purpose of furthering one's education, that is not considered an employee under the Department of Labor, and therefore the Fair Labor Standards Act does not apply. The salary used or received as a result of that appointment also does not apply towards exemption status. I recognize that the IRS has a different interpretation of these appointments, and they will tax you as an employee. But the Department of Labor has a different set. I don't know why. So I did want to go through here and just kind of show you the different types of graduate student appointments that we have here on campus and some of the titles that you might recognize, and say that for an advanced opportunity, a fellow, they are not employees. A research assistant, a lot of individuals I know have research assistants and program or project assistant appointments at the same time. Per the DOL, whatever you're receiving in that research assistant appointment does not go towards the threshold. Project assistants are employees, and we must evaluate them for the DOL threshold. Teaching assistants are employees. However, they are considered teachers, and therefore the salary threshold does not apply. So teaching assistants, just like a teacher in the public sector or the private sector, can make $35,000 a year and work 50 hours a week and receive no additional compensation because the threshold does not apply to teachers. Okay. So Allison kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but again, how are you affected? Your employment category will not change. If you're currently academic staff, you'll remain academic staff. You'll just become a non-exempt academic staff. Same with graduate assistants. If you're currently a student assistant is the employment category for PAs, you'll remain a student assistant. Okay? Professional role in the service to the mission doesn't change. Your job duties don't change. So if remember, we talked about that in order to be considered exempt, you have to meet those 3 tests, with the 3rd test being that your duties are considered, I'm guessing in most cases, this room would be considered learned professionals. Nothing has changed in that regard. The only reason that we are becoming non-exempt is because of the salary threshold. That's it. Your job responsibilities and what you do for this university and what you contribute to this university has not changed. If you're not already paid biweekly, you're going to be transitioning to a biweekly payroll. We'll talk about that later. You'll need to record all hours worked, and we'll also record leave taken in 15-minute increments. And again, if you do work over 40 hours, that's great, or in those areas when you can, those dates where you can work over 40, as a program or project assistant, then you would be required to receive comp time or overtime payments. Okay, so we are going to get more into some more detailing areas of this. So I'm hoping you should have all actually received a side-by-side handout when you received your invitation to this. If you brought that with you, great. If not, that's okay. We're going to talk a lot about it here. And then you also, when you walked in, you received 2 calendars. One's an A basis and one is a C basis. And at the top it says A or C. Just so you know, the A basis are for those individuals who are paid annually or over a 12-month period. The C basis calendar is for those individuals who are paid over a 9-month period. So whichever one applies to you, I would be the one that I would reference as we start moving towards our next section of the presentation. So I will turn my microphone over to Tim.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Tim Delaney. I am with the OHR payroll team. And we are going to take a little bit of time to go over this. I'm going to start with the A basis one. So how it's going to work is your last monthly paycheck, if you are an A basis employee, will be January 2nd, and that will cover the month of December. January 1st, you become a biweekly employee. Unfortunately, with that bad timing, you are at the very end of your very first biweekly pay period. So you will only be on that biweekly pay period for 4 days before the pay period ends. That little pay period is the January A pay period. Most of your benefits as a biweekly employee come out of your A paycheck. Okay? When we get to in a little bit, we'll talk to you about how we're going to mitigate this for you guys so you don't have to worry about those deductions for that first A paycheck. We've got a plan in place. But just so the timing of it is January 16th, you will get paid for whatever you work for those 4 days. Okay? Your first full biweekly pay period is from January 5th through January 18th. And that's going to be paid on January 30th. And then you will start the pattern of getting paid every other Thursday your full biweekly paychecks for whatever you work or have leave for in that pay period. Your B paycheck has state group life and then any of the other percentage-based deductions that you would have like WRS, a 403B, or a 457. So a lot less than the A basis one. If you are a C basis employee, your last full monthly paycheck is going to be on January 2nd, just like the A basis. But because your pay period dates don't run from the first of the month to the end of the month, you're going to get paid on January 2nd for November 19th through December 18th. And then you're going to switch to biweekly, and you'll have those 4 days in that first pay period that'll be paid on the 16th. Then you will have your first full biweekly pay period, again paid on the 30th. But then on January 31st, you're going to get your last partial monthly pay period, which is going to cover from December 19th through December 31st. So you're going to have a monthly, a small biweekly, a regular biweekly, and then a small monthly. And then you will be on the every 2 weeks Thursday pay schedule. When you switch to biweekly, you get paid 26 times a year. So we talked about the A pay period and the B pay period. Twice a year, there is a C pay period to get us to the 26 paychecks. That C pay period does not have any benefit deductions other than WRS and those percentage-based ones. The first one of those that happens in February and is paid in March. We're going to use that C basis in a little bit. We'll tell you how we're going to use that C basis paycheck to help mitigate the benefits from the small A pay period we had. Just to review, those are the dates for the A basis. These are the deductions that are possible that could come out of those A, B, and C paychecks. So like I said, the A paycheck has the majority of your benefits. So once you get into the pattern of the biweekly paychecks, you're going to have a smaller A paycheck and a larger C or B paycheck every month. When you get the slide deck, there's the link to the payroll calendar. Please print one off and have it at your desk or have it available to you so you know and you can verify in your earnings statements the hours that you worked between the pay period dates and the pay date and verify that you are getting paid for every hour you work. Just to remind you, in case you're not one of those people who looks at their earnings statement a lot, you access your earnings statement through your MyUW portal. If you click on the payroll information widgets and the earnings statements, you'll be able to pull up your earnings statement. Some of the things that we want you to be aware of. Your taxes are going to adjust automatically from going from a monthly paycheck to a biweekly paycheck, except if you have an additional flat amount. So if you have an additional $10 every month in federal, that will not adjust automatically to the more pay periods. You're going to need to turn in a new W-4 if you choose to account for you going from 9 or 12 paychecks to 26, or 20 if you're C basis. We need the new W-4 at OHR by January 3rd so that we can get it entered in time for your biweekly paycheck. Direct deposit. Your direct deposit will not be affected, except if you have a secondary account that has a flat dollar amount to it. So if you have $100 per paycheck going into a savings account, that will continue to happen every paycheck. So if you don't want that and you want to adjust for the more paychecks, you're going to need to go into your MyUW, into your self-service, and tweak that dollar amount to match what you want to happen out of every paycheck. State van pool. If you have state van pool, you will need to fill out a new form. And again, we'll need that at OHR on January 3rd. If you are doing partners in giving and you want to adjust your amount because, again, you're having more paychecks, email the payroll inbox with the information and we'll make the adjustment for you. If you have parking, parking is aware of the population and they will be making the switch from everybody who gets monthly paychecks to biweekly paychecks. If you have specific questions for them, the customer service email for parking and they'll be glad to help you out, but they are aware of the population and are going to automatically switch everyone who's affected from monthly to biweekly. If you have 403Bs and 457s, like we talked about, again, those will need to be adjusted if you have flat amounts going into those accounts because you're now going to have more paychecks. That will not happen automatically. Garnishment should be happening automatically, but if you have any questions, you will need to reach out to the service center. They handle all the garnishments. All right. How many of you who are switching to biweekly payroll have had a student job or some other job where you've had to put in hours in a timesheet? By show of hands. For you guys, this will be a piece of cake. You're just going to have to go back to doing that. Okay? this is what your timesheet's going to look like. The Service Center is creating a new timesheet for this population. You will need to record the total number of hours you work in that day to the quarter hour on the day in which it works. We have asked the divisions to consider putting in default schedules for this population. And the reason why is because if you are not familiar with recording your time, we would rather have some default hours in there to generate a paycheck that we can fix later than to cause somebody to not have a paycheck. Ultimately, this is going to be decided by the division on what they want to do, but we've recommended this at least until people are comfortable and remember going in and recording their time. What that means, though, is if you have a default schedule, you will need to change what's on the timesheet to match what actually happens. So if you've got a default schedule that's 4 hours per day, but you end up working 8 on Monday and 8 on Tuesday, you're going to need to go in there and change that 4 hours to 8 hours to match what you work in that day. And then if you don't work on a day where there's hours, you will need to delete those hours out. All right, and now benefits.
So good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Wismiller. I'm actually the benefits manager at the Office of Human Resources. As Tim stated earlier, we do understand that with that first payroll, your first biweekly payroll, the 1A, it is going to only be about 4 days. And so the way that benefits actually work on campus is if there's not enough monies to take benefits, they don't take it all. Okay, and then a lot of times it becomes a snowball effect because obviously it's going to try the next pay period, and that can kind of be a little messy. So what we have decided to do, some of you actually have had conversations probably with your payroll and benefit representatives, and they have, they had given a choice of either a prepay on your last monthly payroll, the 12M. Or what we can do is for those 1A benefits, we can actually defer them until your very first 2C payroll. So those are the payrolls that do not have any deductions on them, typically. So you would we would just turn off your benefits on that first biweekly payroll, and then we would actually put pay lines in to take them on that. So that will actually be a full 2-week payroll by then, and you should be in that rotation, okay? Couple things that, anybody that has like $30 or more is the ones that we're going to automatically do. So if you haven't reached out yet, or if you hadn't done a prepay, we are just actually, instead of just letting them go, we didn't need to hear from anyone, we're automatically doing that. We're going to turn everybody's off, okay? Now, I do have a number of 9-month employees that have asked the question about, because they do get one additional monthly check in that month of January, that can become very, very complicated with benefit flags. Where is it sitting and is it going to take? And so we will be actually turning those off. That's why we're focusing more on the 1A payroll, okay? One additional piece, Tim had mentioned it, but I am going to mention it again. TSAs, so your 403Bs, and your WDC 457s. This is really important that if you have to keep in mind that if you are doing a deduction on this, you're taking into consideration that it's a monthly deduction right now. That monthly deduction will continue. So if you want to break that up, an example of $1,000. If you have $1,000 coming out to, Fidelity, you're going to want to probably split that over those 2 payrolls so that it comes out. Otherwise, it's just going to continue at the $1,000. Okay, on a biweekly paycheck. You can go to your MyUW portal under the benefits tab. There is a section under there that you can actually change that, or you can submit a paper sheet to change it. What I would suggest as well is the 1A, that small payroll, that is one thing we can't turn off. So if you're just wanting to zero it out for that one payroll, you can go ahead and do that, and then you can either turn it back on for your full payroll going forward. Okay? All right.
Hi there, I'm Megan DeZuba with Workforce Relations, and I'm also going to hold the mic because somehow it always falls off and then I can not be heard. So want to make sure you can hear what I'm saying. I'm going to be talking to you about paid leave and work schedules and hours worked today. So if you currently receive leave benefits, such as sick leave, personal holiday, and vacation, your leave benefits will not change as a result of your moving from exempt to non-exempt. As a reminder, non-exempt employees are required to track all hours worked and leave time in 15-minute increments. I'm going to have a lot of information on my slides, but this information will be posted online, so you don't have to worry about writing it all down. We've talked a lot about who's eligible for overtime or comp time. This gives you a good, kind of helpful chart of who's eligible and how it's tracked. For purposes of PAs on a 12-month appointment and they're non-exempt, they're eligible and it's tracked informally. Those on a 9-month appointment are not eligible. As a reminder about overtime and comp time, this information is also available in the campus overtime policy. If the division is paying out overtime, it's earned by a non-exempt employee working more than 40 hours in a work week. The work week is standard for everyone, and it's compensated at time and a half. It has to be approved by the division prior to earning, and paid leave cannot count as hours worked to earn overtime. We're going to talk more about that in some other slides going forward. If the division chooses instead to do comp time, this works a little bit differently. So a non-exempt employee who's worked overtime may bank comp time in lieu of receiving a cash payment on their paycheck for overtime. Each hour worked over 40 is going to convert to 1.5 hours of comp time, and partial hours are going to be prorated. We have an example here and a couple of others coming up as well. Again, accrual and usage is at the discretion of the division, so you want to be checking in with your supervisor or your divisional HR to find out which one you're going to be able to use. And as a reminder, an employee can earn either comp time or be paid overtime, but not both. This information again comes right from the campus overtime policy. When we talk about what does banking mean and how much can you bank for comp time, up to 80 hours can be banked. After that, it has to be paid out as overtime pay. And divisions will have their own specific practices or policies on this, so again, checking in is going to be important. Comp time is managed on a calendar year schedule for all employees, regardless of employee category. This shouldn't be a big deal to you. Some employee categories follow a fiscal year versus a calendar year schedule. So again, not an issue here for the majority of PAs. Any comp time credits carried over from the previous calendar year that are unused by April 30th of the following calendar year will be converted to cash payments and included in earnings for the pay period that includes May 1. A lot of words there. Again, all of this is available in the campus overtime policy. Here's an example of a full-time non-exempt who's working 47 hours in a work week. She will receive 40 hours of pay at the regular hourly rate and 7 hours of overtime pay. Or if her division is instructor that she needs to use comp time instead, it's 10.5 hours of comp time. Here's a part-time non-exempt example. This employee is scheduled to work 50% FTE, or 20 hours per week. If he works 25 hours in a work week, he receives 20 hours of pay at the regular rate and 5 at the regular rate. This is because all hours worked under 40 in a work week are just paid at a regular hourly rate or straight time, regardless of assigned FTE. Scheduling and hours of work changes. Just as a reminder, a non-exempt employee must be paid overtime or receive comp time credits for every hour worked over 40 in a work week. Note, working over 8 hours a day but less than 40 won't result in overtime or comp time. Employees must receive prior approval before working overtime or receiving comp time. And as a reminder, hours worked don't include paid leave. For example, if I'm working 30 hours of my regular schedule and then I try to put in 20 hours of vacation to get comp time or to get overtime, that's not allowed under the policy. Additionally, you want to check in as a reminder with your supervisor or your divisional HR about how these processes will work in your work unit. And as a reminder, hours worked and leave taken need to be documented in 15-minute increments. What is considered work? We want to look at this because this helps us determine if we're owed overtime or comp time. The same first bullet point is going to apply to both exempt and non-exempt. An employee is working whenever they are performing services for the benefit of the employer. For exempt folks who are not eligible for overtime or comp time, they may be in work status beyond their regular hours, beyond their regularly scheduled office hours without accruing overtime or comp time. They may often have to work over 40, and they may be required to do work outside of the regular office location and outside of standard office hours. And again, divisions have a lot of discretion when determining expectations and guidelines for these employees. For purposes of non-exempt, again, the same bullet point at the top. An employee is working whenever they are performing services for the benefit of the employer. That doesn't change. Some differences here for non-exempt purposes. Non-exempt, again, must be paid for all hours worked, so it's important that you're carefully recording your time. And the employee cannot work off the clock or volunteer to do their own job. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. Hours worked by the employee without the employer's knowledge or permission may still be considered hours worked and may still need to be compensated appropriately. Once an employer allows an employee to work or knows that the employee is working, or even becomes aware that the employee is working, the employee must be compensated, even if the work was not pre-approved and even if it was performed outside of the regular office location. In most cases, non-exempt employees should refrain from doing work outside of scheduled work hours, and supervisors should refrain from assigning work outside of scheduled work hours for non-exempt employees. There are some exceptions. You may have job duties that occasionally require you to do something outside of the regular workplace or outside of the regular standard office hours. You want to get this information from your supervisor, your divisional HR, before you just assume that you're doing extra work that will qualify for overtime or comp time. There's also some employees in certain positions where emergency work situations happen, where they have to stay on or they have to cover, and that information should be provided to you, at the time you're taking your job, so you know what to expect with regard to those requirements and expectations. What is de minimis work? We want to think about this when we're determining if the work you're doing outside of your regular schedule is going to allow you to get overtime or comp time. If non-exempt employees do work outside of scheduled work hours, they may be entitled to overtime or comp time if they are working more than 40 hours in a work week and doing work that is more than de minimis. This talks about what is de minimis. It's insubstantial or insignificant periods of time beyond the scheduled working hours that could be disregarded. It doesn't occur on a regular basis. It usually consists of uncertain and indefinite periods of time that involve a few seconds or a few minutes. And then there's also usually practical difficulties in precisely recording the time for payroll purposes. So an example would be if my regular schedule is 40 hours and I go home on a Friday evening and I'm checking an email that came in and that took me 2 minutes, I'm not going to submit for overtime for that 2 minutes. But if I'm doing something that's 30 minutes, that could get me to overtime or comp time. I mentioned earlier that we can't volunteer to do our own work. And this slide goes into detail about a person is a volunteer only if the following criteria are met. And this information, again, will be posted online. It's also information that comes from our overtime policy and the federal regs. So if a supervisor is asking you to volunteer to do your job, that's not okay. And likewise, it's not okay for you to volunteer to do your job to avoid overtime or comp time. Meal and break periods. Paid time includes meals in which the employee is not completely relieved of duties or meals that are less than 30 minutes in duration. For example, if I'm working while eating lunch at my desk, and breaks of less than 20 minutes. Unpaid time includes meal periods of 30 minutes or more in which the employee is completely relieved of duties. For example, I'm able to leave and go out and enjoy a nice relaxing lunch, not sitting at my desk feverishly typing away. For non-exempt university staff, the university has a campus-wide policy. That's under 1401, and that policy is available online. There's no other policy that's university-wide or campus-wide for any of the other categories, but similar breaks are recommended to the extent you're working a full 8-hour day or you're working a 40-hour work week. What can you do to prepare for these changes? We want to remind you to communicate with your supervisor, your work unit, and your divisional HR. Check in and find out what are the guidelines about work schedules. Can you deviate from those schedules? Are you allowed to use overtime or comp time? And what approval process has to happen in order for you to be able to use those things? Do you need to use leave time when you're arriving late or leaving early? If it's going to be 15 minutes or more, most likely you will need to be documenting that, but you do want to check in with your unit. If there are scheduled hours of work, do you need to obtain approval from your supervisor in order to deviate from that schedule? We encourage you to please check in with your supervisor, your divisional HR, before you make changes to your schedule. There are implications for both employees and supervisors if they willfully and intentionally fail to follow policies and procedures. We don't usually see this, but this is just a standard thing about, hey, check in because it could result in discipline if we see you're intentionally not following the rules. If you have an expectation that you work a certain schedule and you're intentionally and willfully working less than that schedule, that's going to be an issue without using leave or without receiving prior approval. If you were told don't go over 40 and you're regularly going over 40 after you've been told, that's going to be an issue. Again, working more than 40 in a work week without prior approval, working more than your scheduled daily hours, or falsifying a time card. Similarly with supervisors, if they're asking employees, allowing or encouraging employees to inaccurately report their hours worked, if they're trying to get folks to volunteer to do their own job, or they're trying to avoid having to pay comp time or overtime, all of those things could be an issue. If you have any issues dealing directly with your supervisor on any of these matters, we want you to discuss that with your HR. You can also reach out to Workforce Relations. Some more thoughts about preparing for the change. Consider and ask your supervisor, if you don't already know, what are the standard hours of work for your unit? Do you have a required call-in or call-off procedure for late arrivals or absences? What is that? What is the time approval process for standard hours? And also, similarly, if you need to use overtime or comp time. Are there any changes permitted to the standard hours of work? What kind of flexibility is available to you? And what's the break and lunch schedule if there's one that applies to your unit?
We will be posting, as I said, resources on our website. Hopefully by the end of this week, if not starting this week or tomorrow, we will have new resources up for people to review. And then our website is listed up there. Like I said earlier, once we get this information posted, we'll be sending out that email again to that list, letting you know that that information is out there and available. Again, if you are not on that list, please come find us after the session so we can get you added. If you know of individuals that need additional help in translating some of the information that we are being provided, our Office of Cultural Linguistics is very happy to help with that, and that information is there as well. Their website is also available on the Office of Human Resources website, and contact information is listed there as well.